everyone, my name is Stephen Griffin. I'm the Director of Music here at Watsons, and it's my great privilege and pleasure to have been asked to welcome you to the Music School Auditorium this evening. A quick moment of housekeeping. There are toilet facilities down the bottom of the corridor near the entrance, just to the right. As there are no pupils present this evening, you are welcome to use the pupil toilets. If you want to use the pupil toilets. I wouldn't recommend it, but should there be an emergency and we need to evacuate the room, there's a fire exit in the corner there and a fire exit directly out the double doors and to the left. And I'd suggest going around the back of the music school or just to the left and ending up on the bandstand, should that be necessary. Christopher Rush was born in 1944 in the East Nuke of Fife fishing village of St Monans. He attended local schools and in 1968 graduated from the University of Aberdeen with a first-class honours in English literature and language and was an English medalist of his year. He was offered a fellowship at Peterhouse, Cambridge, but elected instead to become a schoolmaster. He came to George Watson's College as a student teacher in 1969 and left in 1999. Presumably you qualified by then. I'm just reading what I was told to read. And left in 1999 to write full-time. Over the past 40 years, he has published books in every major genre and his writings have won various awards. A 12-month and a Day has been listed as one of the 100 best Scottish books of all time. And his highly acclaimed book, Will, a novelisation of the life of Shakespeare, has been described as set to eclipse all other semi-fictional accounts. Unsurprisingly, it is to be filmed in due course by Sir Ben Kingsley. Tonight, Chris is delighted to return to Watsons, not as a teacher, but to launch his 25th publication, Nocturne, a novel which focuses on the last days of Frédéric Chopin and his visit to Edinburgh and elsewhere in Scotland shortly before he died. Next month is the 175th anniversary of the composer's death. And in last week's Glasgow Herald, Chris's book was hailed as an exhaustively researched novel and extraordinarily intimate portrait, the product of Christopher Rush's piercingly perceptive imagination. Another person with a piercingly perceptive imagination is Alexander McNamee, who will be bringing to life some of Chopin's piano compositions this evening. A former pupil of George Watson's College, Alexander is currently studying music at Oxford University, starting his second undergraduate year in just a few weeks. Alexander is gaining a reputation as a creative talent himself. A multi-award-winning composer, he has had performances of pieces in notable locations stretching the entire UK, from St Magnus's Cathedral in Kirkwall to Canterbury Cathedral, as well as closer to home at St Giles Cathedral, Canongate Kirk and the Usher Hall. You haven't come here to listen to me bump my gums, and you certainly haven't come here to listen to me play the piano. So without further ado, please welcome Chris Rush.
I was kind of hoping it would be one of these conductors' music styles acting as a Zimmer to steady me in my old age, but this will do fine. So, ladies and gentlemen, normally I'd be thanking you for giving up your evening to come and listen to me. Happily, I can thank you for coming in, listening to something much better, not just someone else, but two someones for the price of one. Frédéric Chopin and Alexander McNamee, who's going to perform him for us. And I'm deeply grateful to the development team for hosting this event in this auditorium, which brings back lots of memories for me and for some of you, I suspect. And also grateful to my publishers for continuing to have faith in this still scribbling old git. So here we are tonight, ourselves and Chopin. Okay, but why write a book about Chopin? Isn't the music enough? Tchaikovsky once said that music begins where words leave off. So why the words? Why write a book about anything for that matter? Well, one of my literary heroes, Dr. Samuel Johnson, once said that the only end of writing is to enable your readers a little better to enjoy life or a little better to endure it. And that's a great answer. We all know how a book can fill hours of emptiness or unfulfilled urges or anxieties. And Chopin experienced a great deal of emptiness and filled it with music like no other. So, to enjoy or to endure, when you listen to Alexander, you'll certainly enjoy. You'll have to endure me for a little while, but I'll try to keep it short. But a short answer to why a book is that I'm not a musicologist like Alexander, although it so happens that music including Chopin, played a huge part in my upbringing. So if I can ask you to bear with me to give you a little bit of personal background. In my early childhood in the 1940s, my father came out of the Navy with a mandolin, with which he had entertained his shipmates, which provided us with occasional musical respites from his drinking and bad temper. But he could play anything on that mandolin. He listened to the wireless, as we used to call it, and got classical pieces off by ear. And one of them, he said, was a nocturne, I think that's how he spelt it, by a Polish chap called Chopin. And I didn't know it at the time, but it was the Nocturne number 11 in G minor, which you'll hear shortly. It struck me as moody and melancholy, and I reckon it met both of Dr. Johnson's criteria to enjoy and to endure. It helped me to endure some things that weren't so happy in my childhood. Until one night, it stopped. The mandolin got smashed to bits in one of our domestic upheavals, and that was that. But not for long. St. Monans was a very small fishing village, and everybody knew everybody. And when the old man just across the field died, his widow presented my father with her deceased husband's mandolin. And so back home from the pub after work, my father, not me, I asked him if he could play that nocturne thing on a new instrument. It was a winter's night, good atmosphere, and he'd only been playing for less than 2 minutes, and this terrible howling sounded out outside in the darkness. And we went outside. It was a dead man's dog. God, I cry when I think about it. You know, sitting there, howling inconsolably in the field just 50 yards away from our house. And it happened every time he played. And he had to stop. And he put away the mandolin. And my heart broke for that dog. He was hearing his master's voice, not on an old gramophone record, but from beyond the grave, as it were. And my dad just stopped playing. It was too much for us. It was what Andrew Lloyd Webber later famously called the power of the music of the night. Well, my dad said, never mind, we'll get you a piano, and you can play proper. He came from Middlesbrough, which I did, and eventually discovered that the piece which had brought tears to my eyes and brought this dead man to life again in the ears of his dog was the Nocturne number 11. And so that was an early influence involving Chopin. But there's more, if you'll forgive me. A few years later, as Stephen said, I attended secondary school, Wade Academy in Anstruther, and then I encountered an extraordinary music teacher called William Blair, who took me through higher music. We nicknamed him Danny because there was a footballer born in 1905 called Danny Blair, same year as our Danny, and so he was always Danny to us. Apart from teaching us to play our musical instruments, he taught us counterpoint, harmony, orchestration, and score reading and the history of music. He also ran an inter-house music festival in which the 3 schoolhouses competed, and there were choirs, quartets, solo singers, solo instrumentalists, and so forth, and madrigals, which involved an entire summer term of practice and rehearsal and got us off lessons. We also had to learn how to conduct, and because we were all taught French and German by a brutal sadist called Herbert Suter, we had to know our languages, and Danny insisted that we sing in the original whenever possible. So I found myself singing to a Scots lass in Gounod's libretto, "Salut demeure chaste et pure." And when I asked Danny why I was addressing her as a residence, which is what une demeure means, I explained that I had to imagine her body as a dwelling place which I might enter, because it contained all that was chaste and pure, which was obviously what attracted Faust to Margarita in the first place. Golden days, but my favourite was the madrigals, so many. I was going to list some of them, but I'll skip. And this all took place in the summer term. And if it happened to be a lovely summer's morning or afternoon, and we had a double period of music followed by lunch or end of school, Danny would sometimes say to me, "Chris, and I wanted a box of tuning forks, but we don't have them here tonight. Here's the box of tuning forks. Take the madrigal group down to the sands, find a rock, ding, and practice, rehearse. I'm off to the staff room for a smoke. Here's a 10-bob note. Get me a packet of 20 king-size players from Eddie Clark's Cafe in Chelsea on the way back. No, tell you what, do it now before you start rehearsing. And mine is still 20 in the pack when I get Golden days, he'd be locked up for that now. As I'd have been locked up for some of the things I did when I was a teacher here. But it was, so it was, I hear somebody recognises, yeah. So it was, I found myself standing on the Anstruther Sands, where the Dreel Burn flows into the Firth of Forth, and singing to a sixth form girl. Ready for your punishment? Since first I saw your face, I resolved to honour and renown you. If now I be disdained, I wish my heart had never known you. What I that loved and you that liked, shall we begin to wrangle? No, 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 my heart is fast and cannot disentangle. Whoa. And when you're down there, look at the old manse on the Esplanade, the 1703 manse. Chopin's widow once came there and played. And she brought Chopin to that house in 1848. And he played there for the minister and the gentry, because Chopin didn't like large audiences. He preferred candlelit salons because his touch was very light and very delicate. You just think of that, said Danny. Chopin's music drifting out into the Firth of Forth. Let that inspire you, and don't forget the fags. I didn't know it at the time, but when Danny spoke about Chopin's widow, he was referring, of course, to Jane Sterling. There's a picture of her as a little girl out there with her dad. She was the last of his 13 children. Excuse me, alcohol is what I really want. It's a virgin. Where was I? So Jane Sterling is the subject of this book, along with the more famous composer. And this was in 1848. And her family home was at Kippendavie in Perthshire. Fife lay just between the two. Edinburgh, he played in Edinburgh, Perth, it's easy to imagine that he could have played in that manse on the Esplanade. Well, we all want a part of a great man. There's no evidence for it beyond that local tradition. A contemporary Scottish poet called Andrew Gregg once wrote a poem called Elephants in Anstruther. Bizarre. Chopin in Anstruther, even more unlikely, but it may have happened because Jane Stirling made lots of things happen for Chopin. And this is the point at which I should say that this book isn't a study of Chopin's music, but of the man who wrote the music, the study of a soul in search of itself, a soul which he found through the piano and made music like no other piano music. The piano was his little kingdom. It was the consummation, devoutly to be wished. He never found consummation in love. He was let down, but the soul he strove for was finally found in the piano, and he shares it with the whole world. And as for Jane Stirling, she's the forgotten woman behind much of that music. Everybody knows that Tchaikovsky's music owes an incalculable debt to the wealthy widow Nadezhda von Meck, without whom I think someone wants to come and have a seat. Do come forward. And without Nadezhda von Meck's generosity, Tchaikovsky would have died a pauper. And Chopin, like Mozart, could well have been slung into a pauper's grave in Paris had it not been for Jane Stirling, the equally wealthy and even more devoted Perthshire girl who had been his pupil in the 1840s and who fell in love with him and brought him to Scotland in the last months of his life. There are two portraits of Chopin you'll have seen, one by Delacroix when Chopin was in his 20s, very romanticised of course, and the other photograph of Chopin a few months before his death. You would hardly think that it was the same man. But Anstruther, well, I was happy to believe it as an Anstruther adolescent, doing my higher music there in 1963 and playing a Chopin nocturne to the best of my ability. But I never forgot Jane Stirling, who became known throughout Europe as Chopin's widow, because she haunted his tomb practically until the day she died. So it's love and death. Love and death change all things, don't they? And the effect they have on us is best expressed in music. One day, Danny came into the music room with a tray and a towel over it, and he whipped it off, and underneath was a human brain, or what we thought was a human brain. Actually, he'd got Jim Selby, our art teacher, to make a model, not the plastic thing that is obviously unreal, but a squishy clay thing. And for a moment or two, we actually believed it. And then Danny came out with his great line. And now he said, "Do you believe that the works of Bach and Handel and Mozart and Haydn and Beethoven and Schubert came out of that lump of jelly? That's just chemistry. Music isn't chemistry. It comes from outside ourselves. It's divine. Schubert got it right." And he sat down and got a girl to sing with him as he played at the piano Schubert's An die Musik. O muse divine, throughout those darkest hours, when life holds not its dreary paths along, thou bidst my heart awaken to thy powers, and so on, that thou makest my soul responsive to thy song. So Handel didn't get it quite right, Danny said. Handel wrote a song called Art Thou Troubled, Music Will Calm Thee. Calm thee? A sedative will calm thee. A fag will calm thee. It's going to calm me right now. So it's more than that. Music isn't a sedative. It speaks to the soul, etc., etc. Oh, Danny boy, I love you so. I still think of him. And as Danny did his best to prove his point, I'm now going to call on Alexander to prove it for us on the piano by playing not one nocturne but two, number 20 in C sharp minor, but beginning with number 11 in G minor, the one I heard 75 years ago on the mandolin, the one that broke the heart of a dog. masterpieces by a maestro. And now Alexander is going to change the mood for us in a moment by playing the Marche Funèbre, the famous funeral march. This novel opens with a funeral, Chopin's funeral, almost 175 years ago, next month, as described in the book, in the journal of Chopin's best friend, the painter Eugène Delacroix. Except that if you look through Delacroix's journals, you won't find an account of that funeral, for the simple reason that I wrote that part of his journal for him, and wrote other parts too. I hope he would forgive me. As you do as an author, you know, putting yourself in someone else's place and imagining what they might have seen and felt. And so, before I say any more, let the piano speak for us. It's the Marche Funèbre. thank you, Alexander. You've got us into the mood for love. There's one problem, though. Confession is confidential between part of the sacrament, private between priest and penitent, and I do have a number of scenes in the book between Chopin and his Polish priest, but I wasn't a fly on the wall at the time, so how do I know what was said? Well, imagination, of course, but I was also able to make use of other documented material, factual, not fictional, and as an example of what Chopin might have confessed had he been anxious to get everything off his chest, which could have been a long story. I don't know about you guys, but if I think back on the days of my folly, I think it would be a very long bath to get myself cleansed for heaven. However, rather than get into too deep waters, I'll skip the spicier bits and read something relatively innocuous, while acknowledging the absolutely daft disclaimer which the government forces us to put on a page all by itself at the beginning of this book. Please note that this book contains strong language and explicit sexual references which may be offensive to some readers. If you find such content objectionable, we suggest you do not continue. We? Who's we? Who the hell's we? I don't suggest it. My publisher, Leslie, doesn't suggest it. I mean, honestly. What can I say? I think this is a spurious, and this unspecified we is forced upon us by a devious form of censorship, if you like, invented by people like John Swinney, shall we say, Swinney probably hasn't read Milton's Areopagitica, and so he doesn't know what's meant by a fugitive and cloistered virtue. It's also a phony form of political correctness. The little bit I'm going to read you is lightened, I hope, by humour. Humour is such a great corrective. It's the best corrective we human beings have. And if we sacrifice that correctiveness to political correctness, then I think we become less human and less able to laugh at ourselves. So Chopin was like all of us, a flawed human being. He didn't pretend to be something else, and his was no fugitive and cloistered virtue. Right, okay, having blown my top, let me introduce the second and very small extract by explaining that, like Alexander, Chopin was a child prodigy, and as such he was introduced to and accepted into the circle of the Russian royal family and played for the Grand Duke Constantine, who was a nutter. When Chopin was playing, I noticed Alexander playing, I was interested in his style, and Chopin used to play looking up at the ceiling, and the Grand Duke, who was absolutely crazy, would get up front and are the notes up there? Completely mad. Well, anyway, his wife, however, the Grand Duke's wife, noticed that Chopin's playing had the effect of calming the Grand Duke down, and so sometimes a carriage was sent for the boy rattling back to the palace at full speed to prevent whatever royal shenanigans might be coming next. Well, one of the Grand Duke's many illegitimate children, Pavel, sometimes played with Chopin afterwards in the garden, and Pavel's tutor, the Count de Moriol, had a daughter, Alexandrine, with whom the boy Chopin was also encouraged to play. Of course, they played the piano together, but the playing didn't stop there. Now, I'll be careful how much I read of this. She took me out among the trees. This is Chopin himself describes this event, and into the rhododendron bushes. There was a dark space inside one of them, screened from the sunlight, completely enclosed by the greenery. We were hidden like Adam and Eve. The darkness was heavy with the blossoms. They were rich and thick and dizzy. My eyes got used to the dimness, but the scents filled my head. It was the first time I was drunk. "This is my secret den," she said, "for the playing of duets. But for this duet, all we need is our lips and our fingers." She lay down in all her finery and drew me to her. I hadn't kissed a girl before and didn't know what to do, but she slipped her tongue quickly into my mouth and it quivered there like a little red eel. I sucked hard on it. My head swam. I groped for her breast. No, she said. No. You take the lower part, the bass clef, just like you do on the piano. She guided my hand up the long, unknown tunnel under her dress, etc., etc. My hand blazed. My fingers burned. It was like primordial fire. "I think you found my G flat," she giggled. The one in the middle, the keynote, yes, that's it. Avoid the A natural, if you will. You might produce the wrong note. That's right, you've got it now. Press and play, but P, if you please, softly, softly, softly. "Now we're married," she said, "and we can practice more." She giggled again. "And you could be an even bigger devil." She called him the little devil. I was big enough, and the devil was in me all right, but we never did it again. We stayed friends, though, right up to the time I left Warsaw, and each time after that I happened to play a G flat, I felt the key burn my middle finger. That was my first sin of the flesh. You are forgiven, my child. Now, perish the thought that these musical innuendos, which so amused Chopin, might corrupt Alexander on his return to Oxford University next month, but I hope he doesn't feel cloistered. He certainly hasn't been cloistered tonight, and I'm going to ask him to play us out by performing the Ballad Number 1 in G minor, which many of you, I think, will remember from that unforgettable Roman Polanski film, The Pianist, about the pianist Władysław Szpilman. His surname, as the friendly German officer who saved him from death pointed out, was perfect for his profession. Szpilman means player. So, Alexander, the ballad.